It's my great pleasure to welcome tonight our speaker, Katherine Field, who, I have to open my document, Katherine Field, who is a native of Canada and who moved to England to complete Masters in Fine and Decorative Arts at the Sotheby's Institute of Art, and who is currently, I'm so sorry, I'm very moved. Our lecturer tonight, Katherine Field, who is the curator for the British Sporting Art Trust in England. As I was saying, she's a native of Canada, and she moved to England to complete a master's in Fine and Decorative Arts at Sotheby's Institute of Art. Since then, she has worked at Tate Britain, the Foundling Museum, and the British Art Journal, and since 2011, she has been senior editor of the de Laszlo Catalogue Raisonné, a project that is devoted to cataloging his work and making his art and his extensive archives available to the public online. It's a wonderful, wonderful catalogue raisonné that's available to everyone on a very interesting artist. She curated the exhibition Philippe de Laszlo, I Am an Artist of the World, at the Hungarian National Gallery in 2019. Katherine has also been a horse enthusiast and an internationally recognized scholar in British sporting art, and it's really our pleasure to welcome her today to talk at this Mellon Lecture. Since December 2019, she has been the curator for the British Sporting Art Trust, and in that capacity, she has organized 2 exhibitions in recent years, Lionel Edwards' Scene from the Saddle and Sir Alfred Munnings' A Life of His Own. This year, she redisplayed the Trust's collection in Palace House at the National Horse Racing Museum in Newmarket in England, which now features new galleries dedicated to Munnings and his contemporaries. So it's our privilege today to have her come to Virginia at VMFA to share with us her passion for Sir Alfred Munnings, one of the most endearing sporting artists and definitely one of Paul Mellon's favorite painters. So please join me in welcoming Katherine Field.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me, and just thank you for being so welcoming. This place is, I've never been to Richmond before, and I've felt nothing but love from all of you, and I really, really appreciate it. And you should be so proud of this museum and this collection. It's very special, and the people working here are extraordinary. So again, thank you so much. So I work as the curator for the British Sporting Art Trust. You might wonder how, as I'm also doing the catalogue raisonné. So it means a lot of work, but I love it. So I was very lucky to do this exhibition last year, which was at the Osborne Studio Gallery in London, which is one of the remaining sporting art galleries, and is still very popular and shows contemporary sporting art. But it was quite unusual for them to have a historic exhibition, and Munnings was very popular, so I think they were thrilled they did it. And then it moved on to the National Horse Racing Museum in Newmarket, which is a wonderful place as well. So if you ever find yourself in England, I highly recommend going. And so this was the cover of the catalogue, which was one of my favorite pictures in the show. So I was very pleased that the Munnings Museum in Dedham, they were very supportive and they let me use it. So thank you to them. Now, dear Paul Mellon has had such an influence on my career, and I wish I'd met him. He just seems like the most extraordinary person. When I was doing my master's in London, I worked at the Paul Mellon Centre for Studies in British Art, using the library there, and now I'm working with the pictures that he gave to the British Sporting Art Trust, so it's been my pleasure to redisplay them and show them off to best advantage in the new galleries in Newmarket. And this is the portrait he commissioned from Munnings, and I think really shows Munnings to how exceptional he was and why he was the premier sporting artist in the 20th century, if not of all time, which might be my opinion. And I think when you look at it, you see that attention to detail, the understanding from the artist. He was a horseman himself. He hunted, so he understands all these fine details. So you see that fold in the breeches of Paul. His foot's in the stirrup, it's perfect. That highlight on the boots, they're polished to military standard. If you look at his hat, you can see the little safety strap, which attaches the top hat to his hunt coat. And I have a hunt coat that has this strap still on it, which has a tag on it. It was made in Newmarket in 1930. So they're, fine tailoring, made to last. You can still wear them today. And he lived in England while his father was the American ambassador to the court of St. James in the early 1930s. And de Laszlo, who's my other artist, he was another artist that the Mellon family were patrons of. So there's quite a few portraits of Andrew Mellon by de Laszlo, which is a nice link. And so he came to England. His mother bought him this horse, which was called Dublin. It's an Irish hunter, of course. And he wrote a very amusing letter, or note in his autobiography, did Paul Mellon, about the painting. When Munnings had almost finished it, he sent a photograph to Mellon for approval. And Mellon wrote, "I received a photograph of the finished picture before Munnings had it delivered. Looking at it, I thought the bushy willow tree on the left was a little disturbing, and wrote to Munnings asking whether he could do something to make it slightly less prominent. Sometime later, I got a blast back saying, in the first place, the tree wasn't a willow, it was a pollarded oak. And second, he had no intention of changing anything whatsoever. So that was that." Which I think gives you a little hint into the character of Munnings. It's not easy having patrons and their demands, and I think that shows his strength of character, strength of will as an artist. He knew when a picture was finished and as he wanted it to be, and there was nothing a patron could say to change his mind. Good. So this is Munnings' studio in Chelsea, and the door that you can see just to the right under the portico is my de Laszlo office door. So I literally walk in the footsteps of Munnings in Chelsea, in London. That's where he had the studio just after the First World War. So he was working on his Canadian cavalry commissions there, many other pictures which we'll see that I was lucky enough to have in the exhibition. And there is a blue plaque, but it's not a real blue plaque, and it's missing the S off Munnings, so it annoys me every day. And this is the interior of a studio, and you can see what it would have looked like in Munnings' time, so filled with this saddle horse, which Paul Mellon, he went to this studio to be painted, and he would have sat on a horse like this. Quite a clever way of doing it. Much harder to paint somebody on a horse, which doesn't stand still generally. So you can see Munnings in full flow there, surrounded by his artist models and any props that he would need for his commissions, canvases that he started, not finished, a real work in progress. And on the right is, this was after a Chelsea Arts Club ball. So the Chelsea Arts Club is just around the corner from the studio. And they had these famous balls and up until the 1950s when they got a bit too riotous and almost destroyed the Royal Albert Hall, which is where they had them. So you'd have thousands of people coming to these balls, all in fancy dress. And this is what we're seeing here. Definitely the end of the ball. Everyone's a bit drunk or hungover, and the morning light is just starting to come in. And interestingly, the man in the hunt coat, the red hunt coat on the right, is David Jagger, another artist. And a friend of mine has found a self-portrait he did of himself in this red hunt coat, which is rather fabulous. And then just around the corner again is Munnings' house, Belden House, which he commissioned. The studio, he lived in the studio initially, but then made enough money that he could buy this house after he married his second wife, Violet. So this is him and his chauffeur coming in the house. And again, just a wonderful experience to walk in his footsteps. Chelsea was the world of artists in the late 19th, early 20th century. You had Sargent nearby, many other famous artists. Whistler would come, and the Chelsea Arts Club was their clubhouse where they all liked to drink and be merry. Munnings started life in Suffolk, and I was lucky enough to go to his birthplace, which is Mendham Mill, which you can see at the top right corner. And it's on a river, and it has these wonderful willow trees, and you can really see the influence of the English landscape, how it formed him. And he became a great landscape painter as well as horse painter, but we don't know about the landscapes quite as much. But I think that's that's what he really wanted to be doing, is painting landscapes. Like Constable, Gainsborough, they were all born very close by. And still today, if you go, you can see this, the photograph on the left, that's one of the pictures he's working on, these wild horses in the Ringland Hills. The one on the right is actually one he owned. It's Ojero, little grey pony, and you see him in quite a lot of these early pictures. But still today, if you go to the area, you can see wild horses, which is quite special in the 21st century. So in about 1910, he moved down to Lamorna Cove. There's a colony of artists down there, and he wanted a different landscape, a different experience, and this is a seaside place, so very, very wild, very different. And there he met Harold and Laura Knight, who would become lifelong friends, and this is the portrait that Harold did of Munnings at that time. And I've been told there's a connection with Edgar Allan Poe, so I'm very pleased I showed this. But Munnings was a great extrovert. He loved to perform. He was your dinner party guest if you wanted to have, historic figures for a dinner. He's definitely one you'd want. Always entertaining, could recite sways of poetry from memory. So this picture is very special, and I was thrilled to have it in the exhibition because it was lost for when it was painted effectively until 2014, I think it was, when it was discovered under another canvas by Laura Knight. So it had been hidden all that time. We're not sure why exactly. Laura's no longer with us, so we can't ask her. But her husband wasn't as fond of Munnings as she was, so potentially. And Munnings' first wife died as well, and I think she was more Harold's friend than Munnings was. So the picture was hidden, and it was wonderful to have it because I think it really encapsulates him at that time. This sort of handsome young artist learning about his art and his technique and going forward and making friends who would stay with him. From there, Munnings lost the sight of one of his eyes in 1898. Quite extraordinary achievement that he could go on painting as he did. He had a bit of trouble with depth perception, but he really didn't let it hold him back at all. But what it meant was when the First World War came around, he could not qualify for service. So he worked at an army remount depot, which is to train horses for the front, which Cecil Aldham found him a position for, until Paul Cannody, who was involved with the finding artists to go to the front to record the experiences of the war, recommended him to go with the Canadian Cavalry, which is great. So he was attached to the Canadian Cavalry in France and painted them. They were doing exceptional things. This is really the death of cavalry in the First World War. You start to have mechanized warfare, and this is the last time you see horses in any strength of numbers. And this is just an exceptional painting. I hadn't seen it before the exhibition, and when it was uncrated, it was so emotional because it was just beautiful. The thickness of the paint, this heroic Canadian cavalryman riding across these barren landscapes, which Munnings experienced. He was at the front with them, which is quite extraordinary. And while there, he painted the head of the Canadian Cavalry, who was actually a British officer, General Jack Seeley on the right. And this is within sight of the front. So, I mean, nerves of steel, General Jack Seeley sitting there within range of the enemy on his horse Warrior. Very famous horse. He wrote a book about him, which I'll speak about in a moment. But this horse is the one, the Canadians called him the horse the Germans couldn't kill because he had so many near-death experiences. And he held his nerve, and he kept going, and he survived the war, which is extraordinary. And when the Canadian Cavalry pictures were exhibited in London in 2018, I think it was, at the National Army Museum, Seeley's grandson, Bruff Scott, who you see on the left, dressed up like his grandfather and stood outside the museum this is Atticus. He's one of the household division horses from Knightsbridge Barracks. So they rode Atty down from the barracks, which isn't too far, and Bruff Scott posed on him outside the museum for the press release, or press conference, which I thought was a very special moment, very extraordinary. And amazing horses. You think of what they were doing, galloping into machine gun fire. Not something we can imagine now, but amazing horse. So both Seeley and Warrior retired back to the Isle of Wight. Seeley, not so much. He was an MP, so he was a politician. He was working very hard. But the horse had a great life back on the Isle of Wight, which is actually where my parents live now. So this painting on the lower right is by Gilbert Holiday, another sporting artist who, very good artist, I like a lot. And this is Seeley on Warrior with his family, with the cliffs of Tennyson Down in the distance. It's a beautiful landscape. So you have the sea, and I've ridden on these hills, and it's very special. And Seeley decided to write a book about his horse, and so Munnings came down to the island, spent about a week there doing drawings. You can see Warrior here. He's 26 years old. He lived until the Second World War. Very old horse, and unfortunately, with there were restrictions on grain during the Second World War, so he was put down at that time. But it had been a long, glorious life. And there's one wonderful description of Munnings at the front line, which I think I'll just read to you because it's quite special. Seeley recalled that Munnings was not then as famous as he is now, but even then discerning folk saw in him the most brilliant painter of horses of his day, and perhaps of all time. He turned up one morning in plain clothes in this bleak area where for months no human being had been seen in anything but French, English, or German uniform. Of course, it had never been the intention of the Canadian authorities that Munnings should join us in the front line, but this whimsical and gallant soul thought this was just the best place in which to be. And so it turned out, for by common consent, his paintings and drawings of the Canadian horses close up against the front line are some of the most brilliant things he has ever done. And I would absolutely agree with that. To see them all together was quite emotional at the National Army Museum. They are phenomenal pictures, and they were all exhibited at Burlington House after the war, and that really made his reputation. Suddenly, everyone knew who he was, and we start to see a new type of sporting art portraiture. So this is Sir Raymond Green in the Munnings art collection, Munnings Museum art collection, and he commissioned this after seeing the Canadian Cavalry exhibition and also a portrait Munnings did of the Earl of Athlone after the war. And I think if you compare this with earlier sporting art, it's something else altogether. He's an artist that has the ability to show these landscapes, which are so dear to hunting people. They understand every covert, every group of trees, every inch of that landscape. They know it, and Munnings could show that and show them and their horses in these wonderful unified compositions. And from Raymond Green, he was invited to lunch with Sir Raymond after the commission, and there he met Tommy Bouch, who was master of the beaver hounds, which are a very, very famous pack in England, Old English foxhounds. And this was the best kind of commission because he was invited to spend as long as he wanted up near Rutland Castle at these are the Woolsthorpe kennels, and he was allowed to paint anything he wanted. There were no restrictions. They would do whatever he wanted. So he could sit in these kennels, paint them at feeding time on the left or out for the exercise on the right. And this is still a landscape. These kennels are very famous. They're still there. You can visit them. And Rutland Castle towers over the landscape nearby. It's quite a beautiful sight. And these were also exhibited. So you can see this reputation was snowballing at this point. But only Munnings could really capture, I think, this amazing sight of snow and the white coat against the snow. It's a very difficult composition to achieve. And I was very lucky to have both of these. These are in the same collection. So very, very generous owner allowed me to borrow them. And part of the work, and because of the exhibition, I had the great fortune of seeing this picture, which has not been seen in over 20 years. So you can tell the expression on my face. I'm like a child who's got their first pony. It was a very special moment. It's been in storage for a very long time. But again, it just shows Munnings' ability to capture these hounds and their characters and their colors. Hounds are wonderful animals. And these are details of the portrait of Ikey Bell, which I'm looking at, and he's another famous master from Kilkenny in Ireland. So Munnings went over in 1922 at the height of the Irish Civil War, effectively. Ike Bell was being forced to leave the hound pack that he'd bred, and a sad moment, but recorded forever by Munnings. Ike Bell was buried in Kilkenny after many years had passed, and I went to see his grave last year, so I feel very attached. And I was very lucky to meet his grandson as well. So you can see he's still awaiting an artist of such authority for his own portrait. So this picture is still held in high esteem, and it was exhibited in 2000 at the Sotheby's exhibition, which sort of relaunched Munnings' career in some ways for a wider public. He's always kept his appeal in the marketplace, but I think we're long overdue a big Munnings exhibition, I think. This was another extraordinary picture that I was able to borrow for the exhibition. Again, one that had not been exhibited or seen for a very, very long time. Very famous racehorse called Humorist with an even more famous jockey called Steve Donoghue. He was the celebrity of his day. And this is one of the early racehorse portraits that Munnings achieved, and he's put everything into it. I think he's really, really made this an example of what he could do, and he certainly got a lot more commissions from this portrait. The horse, sadly, died during the painting of this. He had a hemorrhage. So he got a start at painting Humorist, but had to paint him from memory. It's very sad, but a beautiful picture, and very thrilled to have it. Horse racing became very important in Munnings' life as he made enough money to paint what he wanted. He reverted to Newmarket and painting start pictures. You know, he's a consummate artist. He always thought he could do better. And I think a racing start is the perfect scene for him because it was always different. The silks are different colors. The horses are jostling and moving in different ways. And you could paint an infinite number of compositions. There's a wonderful one in the collection here, which is very nice to see. Many of these are still in the Munnings collection. This is Munnings in his studio. So you can see a wide variety of them. And this is one that I borrowed for the exhibition. And most of these were done in Newmarket, and he was allowed the use of this rubbing house, which is where you used to take the horses in the 19th century and earlier to be rubbed down because they would race multiple races in a day, which is not something we think about now. But it made a perfect studio for him because it faces the course at Newmarket, so he could see the starts from his doorway. Very special that it's still there. It's being restored. So hopefully one day soon it will be open for people to go and see. But the Jockey Club own it now, and were very kind to let me in. And here's Munnings himself doing what he loved most. There's so many little drawings he was doing on these race cards, which the Munnings Museum have. He just loved being on the racetrack. He wasn't a gambler, but he was doing little sketches in his program, which you see him holding there with his Burberry coat over his arm. You can see the little label there. Newmarket, I feel very lucky to spend time there. It's a landscape that hasn't changed since the 17th century. It's really the home of horse racing. And I think if you go upstairs and you look at the Wootton picture of Newmarket, it really hasn't changed very much. People are wearing different clothing. The tack's a little bit different, but you still have these lines of horses galloping in the morning on Warren Hill, doing their exercise, and Munnings, again, would just sit there with a canvas in front of him and paint pictures like this. So I went up there one morning, and really the scene has not changed at all. The buildings are there, albeit under scaffolding. But it is a very special site, so do go to Newmarket. And this is the British Sporting Art Trust galleries, which are actually in the last remaining part of the Royal Palace. So horse racing became a hugely popular sport because of the influence of Charles II and succeeding monarchs. So this is his palace that he would stay in when he was in Newmarket. Quite a special survival of a sporting palace. It's quite modest. You wouldn't expect it to be a sporting palace, but it's a wonderful place for the collection of the British Sporting Art Trust to be on display. And this is one of our best Munnings, I would say. This is Edward Turner. So master of the foxhounds in Sussex. somewhere. Great picture. So we were very lucky I was very lucky to borrow these two. For me, these are the ones that I would want to own. They're wonderful. They're very small, but they're beautiful studies of his own horses, and he bought these in Ireland in 1913. So you have Duchess on the left and Patrick on the right, and they were used as models. So he made enough money that he could go to Ireland on a horse buying spree, spend some of his money, and then he would use his own horses as models throughout his career. And we were very lucky to have Her Majesty Queen Camilla open the show last year before she was queen. And she's a very enthusiastic. She's our patron at the British Sporting Art Trust, so very enthusiastic, very interested. She's a hunting woman herself. She hunted with the Beaufort when she was younger, and a great enthusiast. But it was the Duchess, the grey mare that you saw on the previous slide, that she also wanted to put in her handbag, which I didn't let her, obviously. And she came up to Newmarket this year as well. The Trust commissioned this monumental painting of John Holliday, who was the huntsman of the beaver hunt. So tying in with that history of Munnings painting the same hunt. Actually, you have a beaver point-to-point here as well, so that's well worth seeing later. But she came again to unveil this painting, and it's very much, it's by Charles Church, who is very much in Munnings' footsteps, so an artist well worth looking at if you come across him. And Patrick, as I said, was a model, so you can see here two examples of where he was used. Dodd Proctor on the right is this monumental painting down at the Russell Coates on the south coast. She was also an artist working at Lamorna Cove with the Newlyn School, where Munnings went before the First World War. And then this extraordinary sculpture. I mean, Munnings is an exceptional artist. There's not many people who could be a painter and then pick up sculpture as well. So this is a war memorial for, I knew the name was going to go, Horner, Edward Horner. And that's down in Mells in Somerset. And I've not seen it yet, but it's on my to-do list for sure. A wonderful sculpture. And this is the second sculpture, which is an exceptional work. He was an exceptional horse, and he was a very famous racehorse, won so many races, won the Queen Alexandra 6 times, and the Jockey Club really wanted to commemorate the horse, but also use a sculpture as a trophy. And this is what Munnings produced. It's the most exceptional thing, and the horse came to stay with him at Castle House. So Castle House is the home that he lived in Dedham. And I think everyone just loved having him around. He's one of these characters that very easygoing, loved life, loved being around people. So Munnings did a painting of him as well as the sculpture, but I was able to borrow the sculpture. And Jack was known for just sitting on his manger in the evening. So there's a book written about him in 1934 by R.C. Lyle and Lionel Edwards, the sporting artist that I did an exhibition of before Munnings, did these wonderful drawings of Jack. So this is one of my favorites. Such a sweet horse. And here's Jack doing various things at the exhibition. This is Jack in a box. And I spent a lot of time just sitting near him. He's right by the window, and there's a bench there. So just chatting to people while the exhibition was on, and everyone loved him, and you just felt like to get character and personality into a sculpture is an exceptional thing, and I love this sculpture so much. There's 5 of them, so this is number 2 that belongs to the Munnings Museum, and so it's on loan in Newmarket, and they have another version. Well, the Jockey Club has another, so there's 2 others out there. Now this was a great loan. I love this one. I'm very lucky to ride for the Household Cavalry. I've been exercising their horses for 15 years now, which is quite an exceptional thing to do. They're one of the most senior regiments in the British Army. They are a cavalry regiment still, and I think if you ever see the coronation or Trooping the Colour every year, you'll see the Cavalry Blacks. And this picture belongs to the regiment still. It is in their officers' mess down in Bulford. So quite a privilege to borrow it. It's not seen by the general public, and it's really nice as a curator to be able to share those pictures. And this shows a standard parade. So every 10 years, the regiment would get a new flag or standard, which you see on the left with the corporal of horse there. And that's King George V on his chestnut. And the scene really hasn't changed at all. Here you can see this is Trooping the Colour this year. And then that's Atticus again, actually. So the bay that you saw in front of the Army Museum with Bruff Scott on him in First World War dress, same horse. And that's my little ginger horse, Moby, who I like to ride, the chestnut at the bottom. And some old favorites who are no longer with us in the top right. So that's the Lifeguard Regiment, which you know from the white plume. The Blues and Royals are part of the Household Cavalry Regiment as well, and they have the red plume. But an exceptional picture, and it was actually stolen in the 1960s. Some bright spark in the regiment thought they could spirit it away, and another officer saw it for sale in a St. James's dealership, art dealership. So it was rescued and brought back to the regiment, thankfully, and he was court-martialed. Yeah. The painting was valued at £10,000 in the 1960s, which is an extraordinary amount of money, but actually it's worth a lot more today in terms of inflation. I think the equivalent would be about £150,000 today, and it's worth much, much more than that. So it just shows you the popularity of Munnings, and his prices continue to go up and up and up, which I think is a wonderful thing. And now I didn't want to forget about landscape painting, because this is what Munnings loved to do. And this is Exmoor, and he loved, the landscape there is extraordinary. I've been lucky enough to ride on Exmoor, and the weather changes so quickly. And I think as an artist, that's such a challenge to capture clouds, and the rain comes in, and the wind, and there's wonderful native ponies there, Exmoor ponies, who you can still see today. So Munnings would pack up for the day, carry his paint box up by horseback, and go wherever he fancied and paint whatever he wanted. During the Second World War, they had a house in Withypool, so they were forced to move there while the house in Dedham was requisitioned by the army. And he started writing his memoirs there, and I can definitely recommend them. There's 3 volumes. He's quite verbose, but so entertaining. I mean, you really get a sense of his character and his personality, and just wonderful stories. What a life. So if you're ever looking for something to do, definitely read Munnings' autobiography. Yeah. Now, this is quite an unusual pair. I don't think you'd expect those to be Munnings, would you? But I love them. I think very much the rocks on the right are very Sargent-esque, and he certainly admired John Singer Sargent as a great artist. He felt there was nobody better in his lifetime. They met just before Sargent's death. They were sitting next to each other at a dinner at the Royal Academy. But certainly valued it. And I just love, this is such a difficult painting to do, to get those tones and values to balance, and painting grays and whites is very difficult, and that was the challenge he loved. So you'll often see grey horses in his pictures, or grey oxen in this instance. And this was another exceptional commission for him. This was from the Rothschild family, Baron Robert de Rothschild, down in Chateau Le Valsine in Chantilly, and he was allowed to paint whatever he wanted. So very, very lucky situation. And he was meant to be painting some grey horses that morning, but unfortunately they were covered in coal dust, so he had the oxen instead. But he always felt, he painted quite a few cattle. He felt they were very good models for artists. I think calmer, less flighty, less difficult. They're happy to stand and, be quiet. And I think you can really see he's captured that winter morning in this picture. It's you sort of feel the icy coldness. Very difficult thing to do, and something he did exceptionally well. And another exceptional one. This is from the Earl Harewood, and this was his grandmother, I think, who was the daughter of King George V, who we saw in the Standard Parade, and Queen Mary. And she married the 6th Earl Harewood, and great hunting family. So she wanted to be painted on her her grey horse Portumna, who was given to her as a wedding present from the hunting ladies of Ireland. And Portumna is a place in Ireland. So a wonderful grey horse for Munnings to paint. And the Countess would come downstairs every morning in her habit, known as a buzzvine. That was the maker of these wonderful habits and the height of fashion, and her silk top hat as well. And this was actually painted in Newmarket. So they had a home there during the racing season. This was the Craven meeting, and she would come down every morning dressed, and they would go out to the woods, and he painted this over 3 mornings. And just an exceptional picture. Again, not often seen. I think we're definitely due an exhibition of Munnings, a big retrospective. So let's move towards that, I think, so we can see these pictures. This was also the Countess, and it's an unfinished portrait of the Countess, which he then later on turned into this sort of comic hunting scene. It's called Who's the Lady? And Munnings had a great sense of humor, so there are quite a few comic pictures in his career. And I love the humor of these endless redcoats coming to see who the lady is. And you can see a little stone on the right-hand side pointing everyone towards Melton. So that's Melton Mowbray, the heart of the hunting world. And this will be coming to Newmarket actually next year, so it's being lent to us, which we're really excited about, with 2 of the studies that were done for it, which is it's a very nice thing to do as a curator, to have the studies, the preparatory works, alongside the finished picture. So I'm very excited about that. And there you can see it in Munnings' studio on the left-hand side in the photograph. And interestingly, we also have this one of his last racehorse portraits. This is High Stakes, who belonged to Lord Astor, which I also was lucky enough to borrow for the exhibition. Munnings loves dogs, which I think you can possibly see in this photograph. But it's an exceptional collection at the Munnings Museum because they have all these photographs and they have letters and documents connected that bring the stories alive in such a wonderful way. And this is Violet. This is Munnings' second wife, and I think you can see why he married her, because she looked exceptional on a horse. She was the perfect model, and she posed for many, many, many pictures over his career. She's strong-willed. She kept him together. She had more of a business head than he did, and he always said that he'd either be bankrupt or dead if she wasn't in his life. So she kept the show on the road, and he met her at Richmond Horse Show. So you can imagine her looking like this in the show ring, the perfect model. And this is a wonderful picture on the right-hand side, which is at the Munnings Museum, which is called Myself, My House and My Horse. My wife, my house, and my... No, I've got it wrong. Anyway, you get the general gist, but it's Violet, their horse, their house, and the artist. And they have some of Violet's show ribbons as well, and hat and hunting whips as well, which it's a house, but it's a museum, and it works really, really well. You get a real sense that Violet and Munnings have just left the room. And this is one of his greatest pictures, I think. I would love to see this. I don't know where it is. It was sold at Christie's in 2004 from the Mrs. Payne Whitney collection, so a very good American collection. This is the record price. It was $7.84 million, so gives you an indication of where Munnings' prices are. But it is exceptional. And this is one of Violet's horses. This is Rosemary. And they're preparing for a point-to-point. My boyfriend is the guy in the red coat on the right with the bendy legs. He literally looks like that. So it always makes me laugh, this picture. But I would love to see it. So if anyone knows where it is, do let me know. And there's this wonderful photograph of Munnings painting it in front of their house, Castle House in Dedham, which is a real refuge to them in their life and a place where he could go out on the Stour River and paint and think of Constable and paint the same clouds as Constable. It's a very, very special place in the world, and he did love it, so do visit. And there it is, looking peaceful. It's a wonderful place, and especially wonderful is the studio, which still survives. So this is the studio he brought with him from Swainsthorpe up in Norfolk and came down to Suffolk, and it's just so special. So it's filled with all of the implements of his career, his paintbrushes, his models. This is the model for the Edward Horner Memorial that you saw earlier. You can see Brown Jack in the corner, easels, tack, bits, costume. It's wonderful. It's a real sense of the man himself. And I, again, spend a lot of time there. They open half of the year, so they're not there in winter. They're not open in winter, but if you're in England in the summer, do go. So quite a life. I think it's hard to encapsulate it in one talk, but I hope I've given you a flavor. And I'll just finish off with Munnings' own words, which I think describes the artist he was, and the love he had for the horse, which we absolutely can see from these canvases. Although they have given me much trouble and many sleepless nights, they have been my supporters, friends, my destiny, in fact. Looking back at my life, interwoven with theirs, painting them, feeding them, riding them, thinking about them, I hope that I have learned something of their ways. I have never ceased trying to understand them. Thank you.